It's time for some Combat Radio Field Report with Director Steve Surjik. The movie is Apocalypse Now. Special Forces operator Captain Willard gets a mission to go upriver and terminate a U.S. officer gone rogue. In a movie written by my former boss, John Milius at Warner Brothers, it's Apocalypse Now. Steven, what do you think of this?
I loved the movie when I saw it the first time in the 80s.
Yeah. Late 70s, early 80s. We were kids.
Subsequently, I've probably seen the movie, half a dozen times, maybe more. I saw it again. I watched it again last night, and I was, believe it or not, watching a scene in it again this afternoon just before you called. It's a brilliant film, and it's kind of the confluence of all these incredible, all these incredible careers that came into contact all at the same time. This explosion.
What scene were you rewatching today before we started?
Well, I was watching one of the giant pyrotechnic scenes, one of the taking of the beach for the surfing. Now, the thing about this movie that's deceiving is that the big scenes are always, they kind of blow your mind. And then you go back and you watch the little scenes that you kind of ignored and you go, wow, that's amazing as well. And that's always sort of been my experience with the movie. But I also checked up today on stories about like how the movie was met with, what happened when they were making the movie, because at the time it was a fairly amazing feat that they pulled off. The very fact that they completed it was a miracle.
Yeah, the production on the movie itself was much like the Vietnam War in a way. A lot of people, a lot of equipment, a lot of money getting funneled into something without an end, because there was no ending as Coppola moved forward. There was an ending in the original Milius script, which I read and actually liked, and they shot part of, I think, but ultimately there was no ending for what Coppola wanted to do until he finally decided, well, it just ends with the mission. He assassinates him. But to break it down for the audience real quick, Martin Sheen plays a basically drunk and wrecked SOG operator who's found in a Ho Chi Minh City or Saigon hotel room, brought to the airbase for a mission to kill an American. There's even a CIA operative who's played by the assistant director Jerry Zeismer in the scene who says terminate with extreme prejudice. I should point out that Jerry Zeismer actually wrote a book called Ready When You Are that is one of the definitive production books for anyone trying to get into the Hollywood business. So he shows up, he gets the mission from Harrison Ford and other officers, a mission he can't talk about. He's going up a river in a PBR boat, and all hell kind of unwinds from there. But it's beautifully done in a way, and it's also really played with a lot of restraint. It's no secret that Steve McQueen was the first guy for Willard. It went to Harvey Keitel, who they worked, I think, with for almost 5 months, and then it went.
They shot a lot, and they weren't Coppola and he were not seen it the same way. And Coppola said he didn't like his performance. Go figure. And then.
Well, that takes guts, doesn't it? That's big guts, going months in and then terminating your lead actor. That's
extreme prejudice.
Yeah, really. But I do see what he liked about the Sheen performance because he internalized so much. He was a conflicted guy to a point, not so much on the war itself, but on how to conduct the war, it seemed like.
As he said in one of his lines, he said, the writer, I don't know who wrote the line, but I'm assuming Milius wrote it. Arresting someone for murder here is like handing out parking tickets at the Indy 500.
Yeah.
Speeding tickets.
Speeding tickets. They give you every possibility to look into what he's actually saying, because they shoot up a junk with civilians on it. They basically take a beach just because they want the point. The Robert Duvall character, based on a real guy,
That was the scene I was just rewatching because there was so much production value. I mean, the amount of dollars that went into that scene probably blow our minds even today. Yeah. I think there was more than a dozen helicopters in play. Every time you looked at the screen, there was just levels and levels and levels of action going on. And you got right in front of the camera, it was always a spectacular performance that was really modulated, as you say, and just layers of stuff.
As a guy that loitered around John Milius' office in Warner Brothers and fetched a lot of Taco Bell back then, I needled him to death with apocalypse questions. One time he told me that The demolition team mismarked one of the huts and blew up a bunch of special equipment that Francis had designed for that stunt where the bridge is blown up, blows the Jeep off, and the guys go flying. He said they had built some underwater breathing gear just so the stuntmen could stay under. I'm not sure what they originally had designed there, but it was placed in a hut that the demolition team blew up. That comes directly from John Milius. I didn't change a word of that. I did meet Terry Leonard, too, in that office, who's the stunt guy that gets blown out of the helicopter on fire, you know, when they set down and she meaning the gorilla, throws her, and I mean gorilla in terms of combatant, throws her hat with a bomb in it and blows it sky high.
And then you cut to a high angle shot, chopper point of view, and you see the thing blow up, and you see somebody jump out of the chopper on fire.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an amazing scene. It's, first of all, the movie's kind of loaded with moments that are hard to be believed, like the idea that we're not going to take a certain point or a Viet Cong stronghold until we learn it's surfable, and then we're going to risk everything and go in and blow it to hell so we can surf it. But, there's something about that feels like real Vietnam conduct, actually.
Well, yeah, or at least the America, our view of, why were we there? Were we there to go surfing? Really?
Right.
It was, it's an incredible movie. I think that, I would be interested in talking to John about the writing of it, because I know that he had a challenge from one of his film professors at USC, correct? So anybody who could possibly do the great screen version of Heart of Darkness should do it, because it either can't be done or it's never been done. So it was some challenge he put out to his students, and that's when John began obsessing about this. And my film professor, when I was going to film school, was from the Polish school that Polanski went to, was the same, had this sort of this, also put a challenge to us. But he also brought in a perspective, which was, this is a book that was written for literature, and therefore the reason it's never been done, and the reason if there's flaws in this movie, it's because it's a literary construct. As you go down the river, this mythological, landscape, mindscape is developed. And in a movie, there's only one reality, and therefore it's very, very difficult to actualize. I don't know if they actually got over that. I love the movie. I think it's a great movie. I don't know about, once you read the book, you realize it's a different thing completely. But it's interesting, because at the time when the movie came out, a lot of people were very critical of it.
Yeah.
Yet it was a real big event. You loved it or you hated it, but everyone had to have an opinion. It was back when it was an event, movies were an event.
Yeah, and the Vietnam War was still new business, right? The world hadn't kind of moved beyond it. I mean, now it's all a bunch of beach resorts, and we know what the war was really about, right? It's a bunch of sandals and, like Club Meds. But at the time, there was still so much damage, including in my own family of Vietnam veterans. I mean, I had a cousin who was in that PBR unit that the movie's actually based on, and he told hair-raising stories. And a lot of people were still kind of dealing with the repercussions of the war itself. Milius said the title came from a badge on a hippie's, jacket that said "Peace Now," and he said, "No, I'm going to turn that into a B-52, and it's going to be Apocalypse Now." Vintage Milius, right? Apocalypse Now. And, he went to work on the Conrad idea because it was considered, as you said, to be the type of story no screenwriter could crack. It was like Coppola had built it up into something like Orson Welles couldn't crack it, which Orson Welles did actually fail at making. It was supposed to be the movie before Citizen Kane. He didn't get it off the ground. And he goes, it's going to be the first movie that wins the Nobel Prize. And of course, that's all you need to tell a guy like Milius or a guy like yourself, Steve. As soon as you hear that, then all of a sudden, the laboratories switches on and everyone gets to work.
They did I think they did a pretty incredible job. They shot 1 million feet of film. I mean, the stories about the making of the movie are amazing. They say that, and I don't know how many of these are true. You probably know better than I because of your relationship with the writer, but they said that Francis Ford Coppola lost 100 pounds during the making of the movie. He attempted suicide 3 times.
Yeah.
Well, he was better at making movies than he was at committing suicide, because he's still with us. And also, the lead in the movie had a heart attack.
Yeah.
Sheen had a heart attack, and they had to shoot weeks and weeks without him. They shot over a shoulder of a double. Um, you know, all that being said, the movie was incredible. It's just incredible to watch, and the performances are all great. All the performances
Yeah.
are amazing. You know,
I agree, and it gets pretty interesting, and it goes to interesting places, not just philosophical places, but visual landscapes. You know, it plays a lot with the natives. I mean, what's kind of mind blowing about the entire operation for everyone except the assassin who's ordered to, or the errand boy who's ordered to execute it, is this is the killing of an American officer. An American officer who, by the way, is calling his own shots and by doing so, eventually winning the war in his sector. But he's doing it without the blessing of his command structure. So that's why they want this guy turned. And they're using the crazy switch, he's gone crazy, to authorize it or to make it sort of all sanctimonious. You know, he's clearly, with his own native contingent and his rogue soldiers, literally scaring the life out of the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong. They're petrified of him. He even says that when he goes through the dossier. The Viet Cong and the NVA, they know who he is, and they're scared of him. But the idea is we got to assassinate him, because guess what? Every time we give him an order or try to talk to him, he gives us the finger.
that's right. They even talked about Lyndon Johnson, did they?
Yeah, they do.
I mean, they said that his conversations with Lyndon Johnson were classified, which basically means that Lyndon Johnson didn't like what he heard from him, so
Right.
they classified that conversation. And man, Sheen sweats up a storm in that movie. He sweats and he sweats and he sweats and he sweats. It's unbelievable. The guy's like sweating. Like, by the way, that first AD that you talked about earlier, that ended up with a part of the movie, it is like perfect casting. Like this guy sits there in the background, and he is an unusual looking character. His eyeballs are, I mean, he just watches what other people are saying. Then he just has one line. He's extraordinary. He did an extraordinary job.
He does do a good job. I mean, Coppola knows faces, right? He knows talent. And it's part because that character's in there when it was in the original script that the Department of Defense refused to cooperate with the movie. This thing was shot entirely on Filipino resources while they were fighting communist guerrillas in the local islands, because they had a lot of basically used Vietnam era equipment that the U.S. had turned over to them to fight the commies. But the Department of Defense didn't want any part of this, and that was a big reason, was because they said, and I don't believe it for a second, but they said, no way would a CIA operator go into Vietnam and orchestrate a mission like this where one officer kills another. And I think if that's true, it's because the circumstances just hadn't arose for the Department of Defense to see that happen. It's certainly possible. It comes off as plausible.
Well, there's a gentleman I know who works as a line producer in the business, and he would stand tall if I were to say he's known as a very right-leaning individual. His politics are very conservative, and we've talked about it. I love him because he's intellectually honest, I think, and he's very open to discussing this and how he became that way. He was in Vietnam. He was a military policeman. That's all the information I'm going to give you on him, because I don't want to. However, he said he was in as a military policeman. He was put in. One of the guys that they had incarcerated there was talking. He'd lost his mind, his marbles, and he was talking about stuff that was going on. He was spilling the beans, and the CIA said to him, "Well, you've heard this stuff. Well, you heard him talk about this. So we can do one of two things. One, we can swear you in and upgrade you like your qualifications, security qualifications, and you can remain here as a military policeman guarding this guy. Or we can reassign you. Reassignment was codified, front line, forward operating base. You're going to die. The other one was seemed a lot better to him, so he stayed there. But the guy, what this operative was, what my associate was observing was an operative that was dealing with assassinating Americans, basically, behind enemy lines. So he was witness to it, all politics aside, he was witness to the government, if you will, this would be the military government of America, was assassinating Americans that were fighting in Vietnam. And why? I didn't get into, what the leaning was. I would imagine that they were killing them because they were politically volatile when they come back to America. But he said it was at that point that he lost any respect for government, that there was no accountability for government, that there was no, and and I was like, well, yes, no. I mean, I have a different view on that. I might become, why did you become more like left wing and demand, a certain accountability from government as opposed to getting rid of government? Because we don't deal with military government internally here for the most part. We just occasionally we go there to protect our flank, Anyway.
Government does whatever's required of the government when the time arises. It's really kind of a gray area. I think we all know that. What's interesting about Apocalypse Now is at the time when it came out, it was considered, well, it was hair-raising in a sense because at one point there's a conversation on the PPR boat where Captain Willard tells the boat captain where he's going. And the boat captain says, that's Cambodia. And Willard turns around and says, that's classified. But we know from declassification of documents that we did in fact fight in Cambodia and Laos, and that's in part because we were drawn there based on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The Vietnamese were using it to run supplies.
Chinese resources coming into Vietnam, right? So we were fighting a proxy war with China.
At the time when that was said in the movie, to go back, I mean, I was very young when this came out, but I remember that's part of what angered people was the idea that we would somehow, as Americans, fight an illegal war in countries illegally while telling the population we weren't there. That was still a very foreign concept for Americans to embrace, and it caused a shitstorm at the time.
Yeah, and the reporting was there was no accountability on the reporting, so the amount of young Americans that were dying there, never mind, young Vietnamese. And there was not contrary to, a lot of, mythology, there was not, for the most part, there was not a civil war going on in Vietnam. That was our story.
Yeah.
It was just, it was just our story,
Well, I love that this goes from crazy point to crazy point. Like once they get up the river, they take the point for surfing purposes. They get up the river. By the way, one of the best action sequences ever shot, that whole scene with the air cav. Still unbelievable and in many ways unmatched today. Then they encounter a USO show. What?
That was all done prior to CGI.
Yes. Yeah.
This is all real choppers you've seen in the air. And every time you see someone in the frame, you have foreground choppers going by, background choppers going by, flamethrowers burning things. It's unbelievably dense and impossible.
The orchestration is just absolutely a work of art. I mean, everything about it, including the scene where they first meet Kilgore, where he's handing out death cards and they've got tanks and they're burning down huts and, he shows up and this guy's supposed to be...
You have my march. You're supposed to help me get into the Delta. He goes, no, we're not. I never heard of that before. Another guy, he doesn't even look at the orders. He just hands them to his lieutenant. And he just stares him in the face. And the other guy goes, no, we don't do that. And he goes, you're supposed to help me on what's, Army intelligence and stuff. He goes, well, we can give you a hand, But really what happens is he discovers that the surfer, the world surfer, is part of his crew. So he's like, hey, isn't that... And next thing you know, he's like, talking to the surfer saying, is this guy with you?
Well, it's all who you know in this town, right? And that's vintage Milius as well. That's such a great scene because it does seem like Army bungling, like, oh no, we'll try to help you out, but we're a little busy right now. Maybe you can't tell we're winning a war. And it's just the whole confusion. And, they're still blowing stuff up. They've got wounded civilians. They're evacuating people. It's just one of the great orchestration scene-wise. And even Coppola makes an appearance directing him as the news guy saying, just go by like you're fighting. Just go by. Don't look at the camera.
Let's go through the frame. Just act like you're... one of the reasons I think that the film had the reception that it did when it first came out, and I'm talking about, a long time ago, but in my recollection, a lot of people were upset by the film because it didn't deal with specifics in Vietnam that were politically relevant at the time. And instead, it was attempting to deal with, successfully or not, that's yet for, open to opinion, but it was basically dealing with larger, how shall we say, it tried to be about all wars. It wanted to be about every conflict. It wanted to be about every time we've gone up the river and engaged an enemy. And so I think that those two narratives were in conflict in terms of the sort of political view of the day.
And it does send the message that everything about war is crazy. However proactive you think you're being, 3, 4, 10 times as much of it is spiraling out of control. And I do love that it sends that message very clearly. Like when they get to the USO show, and there's like this sense of craziness, and of course no one can control themselves, and the dancers are attacked.
One of the great scenes. But there's so many great scenes, but that was one of the great scenes.
Yeah, and then they get to the Dolong Bridge, and this is a bridge that's under mortar fire every night and blown apart, but the U.S. military's got to open it up and defend it just to say the road's open, even though it's essentially like a lost outpost. It's like a Foreign Legion outpost, like in the middle of like Morocco, holding it off against thousands and thousands and thousands of Arab raiders. It's like, why are we even doing this? Well, we're doing it just so we can say we have the outpost.
We're holding this ground, yeah. And so every day the bridge is blown apart. Every night the bridge is blown apart. Every day the bridge is rebuilt. And they do that for like just years. And they show up at the bridge, and that's the jumping off point. That's when, that he leaves the boat kind of thing, and he's, where he actually gets to the village. And right before he gets to the village.
And that's such a beautiful metaphor for this movie. It's like every night they blow it up, every morning we open it, every night they blow it up again. And it's like, and it's so confused there that one of the heavy machine gunners even points to him and goes, "Aren't you in charge?" He's like, "Who's in command here?" He's like, "Aren't you?" It's like they don't even know who the CO is.
Beautiful.
And the rock and roll, it's Jimi Hendrix, it's acid, everybody's high, and it's just crazy shit going on.
Yeah.
And everybody just is afraid for their life. Yeah.
I'll give you a couple of fun facts. I know from a conversation I witnessed between Coppola and Milius that Kurt's character, which originally went to Al Pacino and then Redford, and nobody wanted to be in the jungle with Coppola for months on end, ended up in the hands of Marlon Brando. Obviously, they had a relationship from The Godfather. Brando took $1 million advance, showed up, went on a houseboat for a week, disappeared, racked up $1 million a week for several weeks, trying to pretend to not know his lines or try to figure out the inner workings of Kurtz. Basically went down a road that I don't think the director was prepared to go down at the time. But the character of Kurtz, all the characters I think are loosely based on real guys, but also a blend of fiction. And I know from this conversation between Francis Ford Coppola and John Milius that Kurtz was based on the John Wayne character from the Green Berets, which was a pro-Vietnam movie from 1968 with John Wayne basically fighting the commie bastards and, the rah-rah Americanism. And that's basically the model for Kurtz.
And, when you get down at the very end of it, when we finally meet Kurtz, I think that Kurtz was originally written in the book as a 7-foot tall guy, very skinny, and very like his mind was free. He had freed himself from the earth. Yeah. And but when we meet him, he's like 700 pounds. He's laying there like a whale. They lit half of him so that he would just seem like monstrously big, but not beast. And his performance is great. I have to say, he's really, really good. But, there was, I guess you could confirm or deny this, but I heard that one of the first, as a director, we're always involved with talking to actors who have, an actor who is basically, there to just not to just be a great actor, but to also finance the film. They bring, the financiers along with them. And I think that Marlon Brando, he really brought a lot of critical acclaim and a lot of money to the project. So all of a sudden you're talking to a guy who has, is getting paid more than you, has a lot more power than you. And I guess one of the first things he said to Francis Ford Coppola is, well, why does this guy go up the river at all? Why did he? Maybe he shouldn't go up the river. Well, now, as a director, you've shot I don't know how many $1 million worth of. You've spent a year and a half of your life, maybe more, and you're at that point where you got that little sliver to shoot, and your lead is telling you that maybe he shouldn't be the character that every single thing is attached to.
And that's why Brando had Brando's reputation, right? I mean, it's like, I can answer that for you in a very unfriendly way. I'd be like, he's up the river because we fucking say so today. So you're up the fucking river, Brando.
And the danger of that is, of course, that if you lose, never mind that you may just get back on his houseboat and go fishing again. But if you lose an actor has got to believe in what they're doing. So sometimes an actor wants to do it like this instead of like that. And maybe it's marginally from where I'm standing. It's not as good visually, or it's not as interesting to do it that way. It might be more better for them to go up. I to agree with them, because you'll get that the momentum of that performance will carry through to so many other areas in the show. So you sort of, if you want to beat them up, it may be at your peril. You can beat them up somewhere at some point. You just can't stand it anymore. But basically, you got to work with the actor.
Yeah, you do have to work with the actor, and I can imagine that was probably a very intense moment for Coppola when Marlon Brando started to reason and think to himself or out loud, like, why am I even here? Why is this guy even in the army? Why isn't this guy a lifeguard in Santa Monica? And all the things you don't want him to say.
Right. Maybe the guy should have been a lifeguard and everything would be better, but we're not there right now. So anyway, so they had to, and it's not like Francis Ford Coppola is a small personality. I mean, this is a guy who's like, he takes up a lot of space, and the two of them in the same, small hut in Vietnam might be, it may challenge physics,
I got to give Coppola credit, because he does seem to make, he's like the Bruce Lee, be like water, mantra. Whatever goes wrong, he seems to work with it and make it work. I have no doubt when they designed this movie and they wanted Kurtz to show up, that they wanted this guy to be scary and menacing, and Brando was anything but that when he arrived. But yet the way they shot it and the way they gave him the psychological elements to say, Kurtz does become those things in a strange sort of way for everyone around him. It's just not the physical presence they had probably initially counted on. And Coppola bends with a lot of things. Like, he seems to make flexibility sort of his theme.
Yeah. You have to be, as a filmmaker, you have to be able to adapt, and your ability to adapt, is the difference between being a success or a failure. And I think that so many aspects of that movie prove that out. Even the end of the movie, which was rewritten completely, because at the end they firebombed, they napalm the place where Kurtz is, and he burns up. And also our lead who did it also dies in the crossfire. In the end, but at some point along that road, and we don't know why, but Francis and John figured out that no, that we won't kill our lead, and Kurtz will be well. Anyway, the first opening shot with a napalm going off of the movie, that was the end. Right. That was originally the end of the movie. So they, at some point, they put that at the end at the beginning, and they redrew the ending. And I'm talking about things you have to see the movie to understand, but I think that it's a fascinating study in survivability as a filmmaker.
Survivability for sure, and you're right about that. I love the beginning of the film, which is actually the end, which also has a very appropriate song. Robbie Krieger of The Doors came through our studio and told us part of that story as he knew it. And I had known that from talking to Milius, but one of the things that's interesting to me, I don't know if you've read the original draft, is I actually like the ending they had. But Milius said, and Milius, by the way, was barred from the set because he said Francis Ford Coppola was afraid that UA would order him to replace Coppola with the overages. So Milius was never allowed to travel to the Philippines, but Milius said that the reason they didn't go with the ending is because they already had the Kilgore sequence and it was unbeatable. And they just didn't want the end to come up short to that. So they had to do something totally different than a battle scene because they already had the best battle scene on film. So...
yeah, there you go. Yeah, there's, the depth of the, there's so many things that can be said about this, but one of the things that's always fascinating is the cast. You go, well, Pacino turned it down, but right in the film, you have Fishburne is on the boat. You have Sheen who's there. You have a sort of a litany of great characters. I think that Harrison Ford was even in it at one point. Was he cut out, or what, what happened? Where is he?
Well, he's there when they issue the mission. In the initial, when he gets to the airbase and finds one of his commanding generals basically living in a modified mobile home with air conditioning and roast beef being catered in for lunch. Harrison Ford's in that scene.
I see. They give him his marching. By the way, that general who gives them that I looked him up. Bo someone, I think anyway, he was in what was that crazy show in the 70s about people they were in cars? It's Dukes of Hazzard. Now, I know that would make you see you even smirk, Dukes of Hazzard, but in fact he is awesome in that role.
Yeah.
Why? Because the context has changed. He was properly cast in that movie, and he was great. There's a lot of, there was apparently Frances wouldn't work Dennis Hopper in any scene. She wouldn't be in the same scene on the same set with him. So they had to shoot them against each other and fake it. And I mean, every single day must have been torture in a way, If I attempted to commit suicide, I think I would have been more successful,
There's great behind the scenes footage of Coppola trying to coach Hopper. And Hopper basically explaining, like, I don't need to learn my lines, man. I got my own lines. I don't need to learn my lines. I'm going to forget your lines. And Coppola sits there and goes, well, once you learn my lines, you can forget them, which is so brilliant, the way he says that it just makes everyone think, like, yeah, you're right. Now, look, you're a pretty intrepid director, Stephen. You've done a lot of high-octane stuff, a lot of action. Would you take on a project like Apocalypse Now if it landed on your desk?
That's hilarious. Well, sure. There's some things you have to do because they're there, but I've worked with some pretty big time showrunners, and I've heard them say something very similar to their actors. The actors are saying, this doesn't work. We want to change this. This doesn't. We want to change that. And the showrunner says, that's fine, but we have to start with my lines. You have to begin there, and I have to see you do that. And I have to see you try to do it. And if you try and you do it, and I see it, and you see it, and you feel it, and I feel it, then we'll discuss it, not before, And that was kind of the line in the sand.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of actors about that, about their relationship with directors, and what seems to be the most common respectable response is, let's try it once as written, and then we'll do it once your way.
Right. And the danger in that is, of course, the sort of exponential explosion in the timeline that occurs when that happens. But the other danger is that the people don't lean in, like they have a favorite, and they'll lean into their favorite, and they won't exactly work hard on the alternate, and that will go. So you might have like teams of people kind of fighting. It can become insane. But yes, everyone has to dig what they're doing, otherwise it doesn't work.
Right, and that's part of the professionalism of being an actor that you don't see, which is how you conduct yourself in delivering the material. Oftentimes,
I, like an actor, have got to deliver certain dramatic beats. Well, all the dramatic beats, all of the lines, I have to deliver the pages as written. If I don't do that, I don't know what I'm doing there. But B, I won't have a job. But I just see it as my creative challenge to do that. And I see it as an actor's creative challenge to find a way to say the lines. That's just kind of how it works,
We should
Now,
point
that
out.
doesn't mean I'm not flexible. I'm totally flexible. But you got to start with that,
Right. And we should point out that Steve Surjik has acted in a scene with Chuck Heston. And that's absolutely true. In a movie he directed. He not only directed Chuck Heston, he was in a scene with Chuck Heston. That's a pretty big benchmark, brother.
Hilarious, dude. Hilarious. I don't think he didn't have a problem with his lines, even though he had a little bit of Alzheimer's at the time. He was suffering from some, dementia. But I don't think he ever, struggled with lines. He just did them the way they were written, and that was that, And frankly, there's sort of two schools of thought. I mean, on this whole thing. One is, if you're a really great actor, you can deliver those lines or figure out a way to do it. And the other thought is that, well, and I've worked, when you're working, like, I don't want to say how many years I've been in the business, how many scripts I've read. I work for writers. That's my job. So I want to deliver to them exactly what they've written. And usually I'm working with great ones. So it's fun. But sometimes I'm working on a script in a series that's written by someone. It's the first script, second script. Now, by the way, it can be that in that situation, that script can be way better than all the rest I've seen. Or it can be not very good at all, which I've also seen. Right? The reality is that person that's standing there as a writer is going to come marching in and start insisting that the actors who've been, the lead in that show have been dealing with that character and developing the nuances of that character and how they speak and what they do and what they don't say for like years in some cases. And they have a new writer coming in and telling them, no, do it this way. And it's very, very difficult to take that situation seriously. You try to be as respectful as you can, but dear God,
So how much of Kurt's dialogue in this do you think is Brando?
I think a lot of it is. I do.
Possibly.
But I bet Rando said, I bet they got or mostly all the lines out of him, and they probably cut around it, and they probably got something that they thought was equal to or greater than what they wrote. I'm just guessing because that's what they do, But who knows? Did you read those lines with Kurtz at the
You
end in
know,
that written script?
I did read the original draft, but it was probably 20 years ago, so I can't really recall what they had in there for Kurtz. I mean, there's so much mythology around the production that I try to keep what I know from my firsthand relationship with the writer and what like the historical accounts from like Coppola's wife add up to. And now there's all these stories that have combined. Some of them are true and some of them kind of,
Yeah. Things become,
clog the.
every time you retell the story, it becomes bigger and wilder and crazy.
Yeah. I mean,
there's things that you hear and you can directly see are correct. For example, the idea that Kurtz is based on the John Wayne Green Berets character. The rah, rah, rah. If you've seen that movie, that fits, knowing all the players involved. I mean, obviously the problem with the Green Berets is it's basically a Department of Defense propaganda film for our involvement in Vietnam. It's really soft on the realities, but it's actually a pretty interesting action movie, but it's kind of lacking really the emotional depth of the situation. But I was looking at this and I could not believe in rewatching this recently how beautifully lit the ending sequence is. And Storaro from The Conformist, really, to this day, it's a hallmark DP effort.
Storaro is definitely one of the great, if not the great cinematographer of all times. I mean, he's really everything, and that's what I was doing when we just before we began this. Is I watched this film last night, but this one I started watching again because I want to pick scenes and to look at them like you would in film school. You stop it and you watch that shot, and you wonder how they came to that, how the blocking worked, what the drama had to. And you see what he's doing, and it's magnificent. Shot, everything is moving. And the light is always moving behind them, in front of them. It is incredible work.
Well, give us an example of the scenes you stopped on and why.
Well, I mentioned that I stopped on. I was looking at the big ass, scene where they attack the point to bring the surfer down, and it was one of the, they're in the Mekong Delta. There's only two places they can make an entrance with their boat, so they have to tie up. It's a big ass, battle scene with helicopters and a lot of logistics. So I wanted to see that just because it was big and really complex. But on the way there, I started to look at material on the boat. And what you have on the boat is basically 4 or 5 people on the boat. You have the chef, you have the chief, you have Fishburne, you have there's a little group of people on this boat doing things. They start water skiing and they play music, Satisfaction. But even while you're just sitting there with number one, that's Sheen, and he's looking at the dossier on where he's going, you have, now this would be treated in television normally, insert of the piece of paper, insert of the other piece of paper. This is not how they do it. They go to such extremes to show that, the nuances of the internal landscape, the internal mindscape of the character. There's always movement in the light. They shoot through the bottom of the photographs, so you can see kind of the outline of the character that they're looking at without cutting to the shot of the person that you're looking at. It's not important anyway because it's Kurtz 40 years ago. We don't have pictures of, we can't manufacture those anyway. So you're seeing this from this beautiful new trend that emerged, and the way that the light moves behind him. So the camera's below, and you're looking at the sort of shadowy outline through the photograph, and you're seeing the character's face dripping sweat, and the background is moving by, and behind it are details of the villages and stuff that are behind. Now that is like layers and layers and layers of material are happening for an insert, essentially. So something that we would spend 10 minutes, maybe throw to second unit, they probably spend a week shooting, but not just to spend a week, but it solves so many problems, and it is telling the story of the exposition that's required. It's talking about the character that's looking at the material. It's speaking to the location and where they're at, all in the same piece of film. The whole film is like that.
Yeah, And it's amazing to see what they cut out, because even those sequences that were cut out for rhythm, obviously, and they're smart edits. Even the sequences that hit the editing room floor before the redo appeared were pretty beautiful.
Yeah, and I should add that, even though I was looking at the big monstrous, war scene, there is in fact the smaller scenes, that so sort of the more intimate scenes where you have just stillness. For instance, when they're approaching the village where Kurtz is, living, let's say, as much as a mythological creature can live in a village, they're approaching that, and it is the atmosphere is so incredibly rich. There's so much depth in what you're watching. The smoke, the bodies, the heads on, and they're just it's like you're in another universe. It's like a dream. It's unbelievable. And you look at the details that they pay attention to in order to articulate that vibe, and it's quite magnificent. It really just speaks to the ability as filmmakers that they have to reach out and affect all those levels. And yeah, some of it is money driven. A liberal dash of money, solves many problems in production. But you have to have the ability and the vision and the persistence to actually achieve that. And boy, this is one of the few movies you're going to see that.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting. That was ultimately smart to reveal Kurtz in the third act, because I read a draft where the movie starts with him. It starts with him and sort of his rangers, like basically going on a terror campaign. They emerge from a swamp. They've got a lot of like customized sort of in-country characteristics, guys that have written things, very offensive language on their helmets, but they've modified their outfits to sort of be somewhat a combination of U.S. military attire and tribal gear. And then they go on a tirade, which is basically to demonstrate, in classic cinema sense, why this guy must be killed. But without that, becomes so much more mysterious as this guy goes upriver into sort of like the realm of mental chaos to finally gets to Kurt's compound, which I'm amazed they can even find it. Because, well, I guess they cover themselves in the sense that he can find it because the Viet Cong are afraid of him, so it doesn't matter if the Viet Cong knows where he is or not.
Right. Yeah,
So,
they actually say, if you take that early on in the intelligence briefing, there's, travel by boat or by small, you'll find out, it'll put you in touch with the ground, and the ground knows where he is. Everyone will point you in the right direction, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so as you go on, but I think that would have been an interesting movie as well, but because, if you were to see what Kurtz did, and you saw kind of the horrible things that he did he was a war criminal, basically, right? And so you can very early on, you can say, this is a bad group of people, and I'm going to feel a lot better when I leave the theater if these people don't exist anymore, as opposed to, yeah, as you said, kind of a construct based on bureaucratic interpretation of who he is. The only reason the bureaucracy in Washington or the Pentagon want him out is because he's not following the chain of command. And they say, but they also say it's beyond the pale, I believe, are the words that the general uses. Beyond the pale. He's an animal. He's become a savage. He's doing things that aren't, he's become a murderer. And that's when we comment on the philosophy of, like, how can you be a murderer in war?
Is it wrong for me to identify with some of what Kurtz says from a philosophical angle?
Is it wrong? It's not wrong to feel anything in a movie. That's the beauty of it. It's a fantasy land. I love those lines where the longer I stay, I'm crouched in my hut, the stronger I become weaker. Charlie becomes stronger. All those quotes about war, about they're all true.
Mm-hmm.
So if your villain has to be, at least you have to be able to. Your villain has to be at least as strong as your hero, or vice versa. Otherwise, you don't have any. Your villain actually defines your hero with their strength. So you better be able to identify with it.
Well, he makes such a powerful point when he talks about the training that goes into like an Air Force officer or a Marine Corps, you know, flight captain to drop napalm from the sky, but if he writes fuck on his aircraft, he'd get written up and probably court-martialed. And like the things you ask human beings to deal with in military slash war situations, and you know what they get punished for, like what they're perceived to be and what they're actually dealing with, are really two different animals. And I think that's what he drives home. I love it too when he asks Willard, Martin Sheen, are you an assassin? And he says, no, I'm a soldier. And Brando snaps back. He's like, you're neither. You're an errand boy. And it's just so appropriate. You know, it's just like, you wonder, like, if that's Brando, then you're getting your money's worth if he came up with that.
I believe that Milius wrote that line, but you would know better than I. But that's, yeah. No, you're an errand boy for the what? For the you know.
Yeah, it feels like Milius. You're right. It does feel like a Milius line. I mean, Milius is so obvious in parts of the movie with the surfing and the, you know, Charlie don't surf, which everyone has quoted, and you know, like there's he really is the only guy that could have created this animal in script form, I think.
It's great when you see what's the commander's name? Who's, you know, who said Charlie don't surf? What's the character's name? Is it Kilgore? No.
Yeah, Kilgore, Duvall.
Kilgore is like, they've devastated that beach. They've killed a zillion people. And there's a man, you know, a Vietnamese man dying, bleeding, holding his guts in. And the group is on trying to, and he comes in, what's going on here? And he says, they say, well, he's dying. He's like, get away from him. And you think he's going to take out a gun and shoot the guy, but no, because he's been fighting with them. So he takes his canteen, says, any man can drink from my canteen who's been fighting for. Then he sees the surfer, drops the fucking canteen on his head. Do you say, are you trying, I love your cutback. Your cutback's the best.
Yeah.
We all surf here, but no one's your level. We really want to be, the guy's dying behind him now, he doesn't care. These are great moments.
Yeah. I mean, they're literally shooting up school kids among with enemy combatants, and he's sitting there in his post in the chopper saying, look, it cuts both ways. You got a left and you got a right. And he's like totally removed from the killing machine around him. And he's like, look at this, Lance. You know,
early where, you know, he's described as a guy that knows he's never going to get a scratch when he's in there. And they're full attack mode, you know, with the music playing, and they're hammering away at these poor villagers. And as you said, he's talking about the surf. They take out, he sees something happen. I guess it was something happened that one of his guys in the chopper got taken down. He's like, savages, I'm going to deal with this myself. Drop it. And then he's like, boom, it blows the boat up. And he says something like, okay, circle around. Then he picks up his coffee cup like he's on his way to work, you know. Takes a little sip of coffee, puts it like, you know, morning work.
Yeah, one of the great performances by Duvall for sure. I mean, just the, you know, and the language. It's interesting because now we've heard so much bad language, but at the time, to hear that kind of racist, direct language from pilots and gunners in the air directed at people on the ground, you know, it was kind of unnerving to hear it when you were young, you know, like, I mean, they rip the top off it as far as the severity of what they can say. It's funny thing is the language is probably the least of what's going on there. I mean, they're literally blowing people's heads off, but I remember the language going like, dude, I've never heard someone called that. That was, and you know, and they're all using it, and then they're, you know, and it's like, and of course with the Wagner music, it's almost like a celebration of steel.
And I'll tell you what, even when I first saw that the Wagner playing, I think that it's possible, but you know, choppers are awfully loud.
Yeah, I don't think it would have worked either, but man, it works for the movie, doesn't it?
Beautiful, yeah. They make it source music, and it's great.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just know that in a chopper, it's so loud in a chopper. You wear cans that take out 100 decibels off the top, and you have a microphone that sits against your throat and one on your mouth. So you talk to each other in the room. Inside the chopper, it's so loud you can barely works. So imagine outside the chopper how loud it is. Choppers are loud.
Yeah. Unbelievable. What's your favorite scene in the movie?
Geez, I don't know. I mean, I like I actually like the CIA scene at the beginning where they give him his marching orders. I always like those scenes. I like that scene in Sicario, where they're in the glass room and
Yeah.
they're getting the order. I like those scenes because I think that they're very difficult to do them in an interesting way that feels like, authentic and feels. And so to see it again and to realize how good it was. Um, but I even liked, there was a scene that was cut out that I saw that was, it was like back when the French were in Vietnam and they had wine that was, they're serving, because French culture is like prevalent in Vietnam now because of their occupation. And they had those scenes. I saw part of the scene that was just spectacular. And it was lovely because it contrasted so much of what was in the movie. Had to go.
You know, excuse me. It had to go for rhythmic and timing purposes, and I understand that, but it's interesting to watch it. What struck me with the French, with the colonial scene, is it's a lot like Kurtz in a sense. It's guys still fighting the war on their terms, regardless of what their government says. Like the French had long pulled out of Vietnam, but these guys, because they own a rubber plantation or have some sort of setup, they've got their little commandos and they're staying and they're fighting it. I read a real interesting fact from. Might have been Hunters and Shooters. When I was going through Vietnam era books for a project, a lot of the French Foreign Legion troops fighting in Vietnam for the French government in some of the big sieges and some of those firefights were actually runaway SS officers who, after World War II, joined the French Foreign Legion to get French citizenship and disappear, because those were the days when you can strip your life away and become someone new by joining it. It's not like that anymore. You can't really run to a French Foreign Legion outpost and sign up if you committed murder. Now they'll turn you over to the cops. But there was a time where they'd turn you over and they'd ask you what your name was, and where they'd give you a new name. And I thought that was really interesting to read, because talk about men with a pretty savage background and sort of an expertise in barbarity, like the SS.
Expertise in barbarity. I love it. That's great.
Sure. And I mean, they're fighting, they're probably roaming around the Vietnamese populace, probably not the classiest guys, and then they're fighting in the jungles. And I thought, wow. So you look at what the Viet Cong or the North Vietnamese had to survive by the end of that war, and it's actually fairly amazing.
Vietnam had, Vietnam has had a long history of occupationists there. Whether it was the French, the Americans, it was the Chinese are there, fighting them now. They're trying to steal their offshore oil, or they are stealing their offshore oil effectively. Vietnam has a real wild history, and it's the most. I have to just say that I went to Vietnam and I traveled around, and I traveled up the Mekong Delta to I got to Cambodia. I really, mostly in Saigon though, but the Vietnamese people are an amazing people who've adapted in an amazing way. And they have the best of so many cultures, because they have French culture in their cuisine. Now you imagine Asian and French mixed. It's the best food in the world. They have coffee. They're into coffee in a way that is like above and beyond. They have American know-how, and they love the whole American way. And they don't have any sort of comment on what happened in the past. That was the past. Right now, I'd like to sell you a bowl of duck soup and then a taxi ride up over to the whatever, and that's it. And it's a very young city. It's like maybe, I don't know, there might be 4 million motorcycles in a city of 7 million. Is that possible? I mean, the roads are so crowded with motorcycles that it's just insane. But the place itself is brilliant. It's an amazing place.
Nice. Well, maybe you'll get the chance to do your Vietnam pick right on the real locations.
Nothing would make me happier. Saigon has changed so dramatically that we might have to find another town, but what a great city. I mean, Saigon is a great city. The people are great. And if it was just a couple degrees cooler and not quite as humid, I would say this is a retirement home for me,
It's still early, buddy. It's still early in your career for retirement, but you can consider some options in a decade or two. So what would you say about Apocalypse Now in closing? Like, how would you sum this movie up?
I would say that Apocalypse Now is not a movie about Vietnam. It's a movie about war. And it's about a movie about the internal war that we all, at its best, it's a movie about the war that we all are fighting. And that's what makes it great. And so if you look at the movie under that lens, with that perspective, you're going to enjoy it a lot. If you look at it as a historical event, it'll be a little bit harder to take, I think. But I think it's a great movie, and you can love it or you can hate it, but you got to see it.
Yeah, you do have to see it. You absolutely do have to see it. And you can love it, you can hate it. I personally think it's one of the best. It's certainly one of the most ambitious films ever made, and in my opinion, it's also one of the best. It's just, I saw it two different ways. When I was young, I saw it as just a war picture, 8, 9, 10 years old. And then later, when I was at Warner Brothers working, I watched it again and realized the depth of what's in this movie to process, the psychological ramifications that these characters go through and hints put on the audience is pretty masterful, the way that's delivered. And, definitely a good time. It's one of these days.
Martin Sheen looks amazing.
Yes. He said he was too old for the role, and he probably was. He was 36 at the time. But he sells it. He sells it.
He sells it. He looks super young. And Lawrence Fishburne was too young for the role. He was 14 when he was on that boat. He lied about his age.
Well, I would too, to be in the movie. Honestly, I'm not even an actor. But if you told me this is what you're doing, and you got a paycheck for about, I don't know, a year and a half in the Philippines, I'd be like, how old do I need to be? That's how old I am.
Exactly right. Exactly right. I have a feeling that if you just hung around that camp, you'd end up with the job.
Yeah, probably.
When you're that far away, and you happen to be, in the same milieu culturally as the filmmakers, you'll probably end up on the floor doing something.
Right. And it's interesting because I'm sure a lot of these actors, like these guys that pull, Willard out of bed drunk for the mission, those guys were probably working in the camera department or something. And he goes, hey, throw those guys in your uniform here. You're going to present his orders and throw them in the shower.
Right. They were. You know it. Yeah.
It works, man. It works. And it works even better discussing an epic movie like this with an epic director like you. Steve Surjik, everybody.
Go. Listen to you go. You big fat liar. I think I think you're very sweet. You're very generous. I was lucky enough to see that movie at a time when it really helped me make movies, because I got to see the obstacles that that were in front of that filmmaker. And I know it seems absurd because he's in a totally different world, but all of our problems are the same. We all suffer the same obstacles. They're just a different scale.
I don't think anyone's. Well, I'm sure someone has asked, but I don't think I've ever seen anyone ask or get a reaction from Harvey Keitel on what the situation was on his last day. I mean, I don't know how you do that 5 months in. That seemed like, Coppola, obviously, he can deliver a message, and it's probably in the form of a plane ticket, but I can't imagine going back and making the decision, we're going to reshoot all the Captain Willard stuff.
It's just insanely brave, and we could have probably an episode. I really want to move some of these discussions toward how does a movie get made and what happens in the process, because I think that is as fascinating as anything. And in the movie, it wasn't The Gear Wrath of God, but by the way, A Gear Wrath of God was which was made by Herzog, was a movie that influenced your pal Emilius there. That made him want to make it was or Coppola. Anyway, one of the two creators of this thing was largely influenced by Gear Wrath of God. Now, on that topic, I know that when they made Fitzcarraldo, they shot that is Herzog shot 100 days or close to a year with. It was like about 3 months of rehearsal. It was like 100 and some days of shooting with Mick Jagger.
Yeah, you had told me that.
And Mick Jagger said, well, my contract's up on this day. I'm going home. And they couldn't believe it. He's like, well, what? You got to be, no. I work for this many days and then I'm done. And now I go back to what I do, which is I dance on stage and I write songs. And I'm going to be happy to get away from this because people don't like living in the jungle so much. But there's probably a litany of these situations where people reshot with actors, new actors, and had to, redo everything. I think that Fitzcarraldo was even heavier. I think they had to reshoot like a lot of stuff, and I thought it must have hurt them profoundly.
Unbelievable. I would love to see some of the footage though with Keitel in the role.
Yes, I too. I think Harvey Keitel is just a brilliant actor, and I think that it would be just fascinating to see that. And one day maybe they'll release that footage, but they may have to. Like I don't know what was their contract with Harvey Keitel. You know what I mean? Like what?
I don't know. I'm sure they can release it. I don't know why they don't. I mean, maybe it's already out there somewhere and we're just unaware of it. Who knows? It could be that Coppola doesn't want to release it because he doesn't want to hurt Harvey's feelings at this point. I don't know. Because getting fired sucks. Look, welcome to the real world.
We don't know that he was fired. I mean, that's the story we heard. But history is written by the winners. So maybe he quit. Maybe who knows what happened. But he probably was fired.
That's an interesting point because he very well could have quit the way things were going.
You know?
He could have said, "I've had enough. I'm out."
I think Milius would have told me if he quit.
Yes, he would have. That definitely would have been a story that you would have heard about.
What?
I have to say, Milius in particular was always great about us questioning. I mean, we would ask him questions about everything from Red Dawn to Conan the Barbarian. He never once told us he did not have time for our nonsense. He entertained every question and went into great detail. And I have to say, he was really not only an inspiration to talk to, but just a class act to talk to. And when it came to this movie, he would tell you everything you wanted to know, including the ugly. The bad, the ugly, sets getting washed away in monsoons.
Oh yeah, they had a typhoon that knocked them down for a long time. Yeah,
I remember he told me. He goes, I wasn't allowed on the set because Francis was afraid I would be his replacement. UA would order his removal because the overages were so bad, and
and he had to leave and like raise money when he was. I mean, I can't even imagine. Hey, what did Scott Glenn do in the movie? Where is he? Because I've watched the movie a bunch. I haven't seen him yet.
Scott Glenn shows up. You see him in a lot of the behind-the-scenes footage, but I really only see him in one or two shots at the end because he's the first assassin down the river, as we know, right? He gets the mission first, but joins up with Kurtz, which was, in one of the scripts I read, the same path that Willard takes. Willard ultimately joins up with Kurtz and fights the NVA, one last epic battle that gets them all killed. Hence the front of the movie now. But he shows up when Willard walks up the steps for the first time in the Kurtz compound, and there's a guy holding a shotgun and a beret, and he's got like the bandoleros of shotgun shells. That's Scott Glenn with a beard.
Got it. It's the beard.
There's outtakes with him too, where like when Sheen is imprisoned in the little bamboo cage, Glenn comes around and either prods him or talks to him or I don't know, terrorizes him, does Scott Glenn type stuff.
Right. Scott Glenn, great actor.
You have worked with him, haven't you?
Multiple jobs. He played Stick, in the Defenders, and then well, he actually spread out over a couple of different shows, but he basically he basically was the guy who taught everyone like how to work with while you're blind, how to use your ears and your senses to battle.
You know what I love about what you just said is it reminds me in this movie that we're talking about here how powerful the concept of silence is. Like there's no telegraphing anything to the audience with dialogue.
Right. Yeah, I totally. I mean, even I would say the strongest scenes. Like normally when you're watching something, so often if there's silence, you're going, well, come on, get on with it because I'm bored now. But there's so much going on in the silences of Apocalypse Now. I once heard a great playwright. I once heard a great playwright say, "I make my living listening to what people don't say," and that seems so profound to me. That was Larry Gelbart, by the way. It seems so profound to me because, of course, that's what makes a scene seem real. Is that in certain situations, it's all about what people don't say, not what they do say. And we've become so obsessed with telling the story with words that we never get to the place where when someone doesn't say something, we know it means something. And that goes for everyone. That goes for the filmmakers, what they show, what they don't show. It's like the definition of art, really. Pornography is you show everything. Art is you don't show anything you don't need to show. You might even show a little less than you should. And people make it up. And that's where literature works better than film, because you become as a reader, you become an active participant in creating the reality. In film, it's much more difficult because there is only one reality, and it's what's in front of you on the screen.
Right. Well put, man. Well put. Well, you got anything else to add on Apocalypse?
No, but I think that I am going to watch it even again tonight. This is a movie that I curse when I see it coming on late night, whatever it shows up, because that, some of Martin Scorsese's work, I have to just then watch again. There's no way out. You just have to get down, get your glass of wine and watch it again, because it's meant to be seen again.
Order the Italian food, open the bottle of Chianti, or get your...
Slice the garlic thin, so it can be just almost liquefied,
Right. I can't watch Godfather without making Italian food. It's impossible. Like, I have to go in and make a bad batch of spaghetti. But,
For me, it's Goodfellas, but there you go. It's
Same. That's a movie we should talk about sometime. Total classic.
I don't know if we're qualified for that one, honestly.
Oh, my friend, you're more qualified than you realize. See, that's Steve Surjik being very modest. One of the best directors working.
And
that's a curse when it comes on, because you have to watch that again. You go, how many times have I watched this movie? And I see a different movie every time. How can that be? It's because as a viewer, you have created parts of it that have now changed. Now you're watching it again, you're creating different parts. That's because it's art. So.
Right. Well, buddy, this has been a total privilege, man. It's nice to see you.
yeah.
It's all mine. And we probably won't see each other for a little while, or maybe one more time, but I've been called back to action. I got the call from the CIA and they're sending me back in country. So I'm going to head out to it.
He's got his dossier, ladies and gentlemen. Steve, stay on the line for one split second, but I'm going to sign off. Apocalypse Now, obviously from United Artists. It's a work of art. You should all see it. Even if you hate the film after watching it, you need the experience of seeing it. And thank God it's easily available. Thank you for joining us this Field Report with Steve Surjik, and I'm Ethan Dettenmaier.